Two experts, one hot topic, all sides explored. This is The Flip Side. The Flip Side is a podcast series featuring lively debate and opposing viewpoints on timely topics of importance to markets and businesses around the globe.
Welcome to The Flip Side. I'm Brad Rogoff, head of research at Barclays, and I am joined today by Ajay Rajadhyaksha, our chairman of research. So this is our first episode since the dust has now settled on the U.S. election. So we're going to discuss the Trump economic agenda and the ways in which it could reshape the U.S. and world economies. And it's a very simple question, I think, Ajay. Will Trump policies be transformational or incremental?
That's a pretty good way to frame it, Brad. And I would say that the Trump economic agenda, you can break it up into four distinct areas. The first, policy decisions on immigration. The second will be the focus on deregulation. And you remember, Trump has promised executive orders on day one in both fronts.
All right, so you're proving this is a research podcast. You didn't actually answer my question yet, but hopefully you will. These are key points. I agree, Ajay. But executive orders don't necessarily mean that it's transformational or incremental. I assume your other two big items are on the economic agenda, the expiring Trump tax cuts and perhaps the issue the whole world has been waiting on. How aggressive is the new tariff policy and against which countries? I suspect taxes and tariffs will take at least a few months to firm up. But in each case, Ajay, I think the policy itself will be a big change for the economy. That clearly puts me more in the transformational camp.
I don't know. I would take the other side, Brad. I'm happy to argue the other side. I will say that Trump policies are incremental in nature. I don't think they will change the basic state of what is already a pretty good economy. Unemployment is low even as the Fed has started cutting rates. Everyone's 401ks have zoomed in the last 2 years. And look, while Trump has promised immediate action on immigration and deregulation, I think you will find that when he releases details on each, it'll be clear that neither policy is a game changer.
All right, let's go through a bunch of these things then. And let's start with immigration, since that's the one you just mentioned. The incoming administration, it's discussed deporting as many as 11 million undocumented immigrants. That is a massive shrinkage in the workforce. And it would happen pretty quickly, or at least that's what they're saying. So purely from an economic standpoint, how is that not a big deal?
Simply because it's not doable. The administration can say what it likes. The logistical hurdles are immense. You have to go community by community. You have to find people who don't wish to be found. You have to apprehend them, detain them, house them in many cases. Congress needs to pass new legislation to fund deportation on this scale, as much as hundreds of billions of dollars worth. And finally, other countries have to agree to take all of these millions of people back. And there's one final point, Brad. You need state and local authorities to cooperate fully. And quite honestly, in many blue states and cities, they just won't.
Those are fair points, but so far, the tone hasn't really changed. It's been really strict, Ajay. If you look at what new border czar Tom Homan has warned, he said to governors and mayors that they will have to cooperate with federal authorities. The new administration has gone as far as to say that they're going to hold back funds from so-called sanctuary cities and states. They've even implied some prosecution of officials who are going to resist this deportation. I mean, the Republicans seem really serious, don't they?
They can seem as serious as they want. This plan is not practical. Look, don't forget, these immigrants are a major source of labor in many industries. Landscaping, construction, food processing. By many estimates, about half the fruit pickers in this country are illegal immigrants. They all suddenly go away, you're not getting your apples. Even if such a thing were possible, businesses up and down the country will start screaming to get them back.
Okay, I understand that, and maybe that means these 11 million numbers aren't quite realistic, right? The extent of it to be determined. So, and if deportation of these existing undocumented immigrants isn't necessarily proceeding at the pace that the rhetoric has suggested, I assume you're going to agree that something is going to happen.
Yes, I think deportations will probably run 400 to 500K a year. We are currently running at about half of that. So we will go up to the Obama years, and I think it'll be mostly focused on those with criminal records. But that is not a game changer. That is just, in my mind, that is incremental.
All right, so this has all been about the practicalities of deporting individuals who are already in the country. One place where the administration can have a more immediate impact, I think a lot easier to have an immediate impact, is on new illegal immigration. So remain in Mexico is a Trump policy from the first term that, did work for the most part. As we saw a few weeks ago, the president-elect is threatening tariffs on Mexico to stem the flow of new migrants, and Mexico seems very eager to respond and work with the new administration.
Yeah, I think you're right there. New immigration will slow, and so will new labor supply. And we all know this. Rising labor supply, fueled by illegal immigration, played a key role in temporarily pushing up U.S. trend growth in recent years. So now that'll change. Trend growth will drift lower as labor supply slows. But again, I would argue that's an incremental change. That is not anywhere near as transformational as deporting 11 million people would be.
Let's pivot now. Let's talk about deregulation. So the Trump administration, its promise to unleash animal spirits. I know with your 401k comments, you probably argue that those have already been unleashed. But, they've argued to release that within the U.S. economy through really industry-wide deregulation. Drill, baby, drill has definitely been a slogan we've heard over the course of this campaign. And the aim is to push down oil prices and make energy cheaper. Campaign supporters like Mark Andreessen have talked about the U.S. economy, being a coiled spring ready to grow at closer to 4% than 2%. Treasury Secretary nominee Besson has a 3-3-3 plan that leans heavily on deregulation. Grow the economy 3%, get the deficit down to 3% of GDP, and pump 3 million more barrels of oil a day. All of that seems pretty transformational. Ajay, if it were to become a reality, would you agree there?
Look, what I'll say here, Brad, is that deregulation is not a magic bullet. It's not going to be the reason a 28 trillion mature, developed economy suddenly starts growing at 4 instead of 2.5. You cannot suddenly suspend the laws of economics. Now, I agree with you. There will be a day one order freezing all new regulation. But guess what? We had the exact same freeze on day one of the first Trump term. And the economy grew healthily then. Q4 over Q4, we grew 2.5%. But that's 2.5, not over 4.
I think you're underestimating how much the regulatory approach matters, Ajay. M&A is likely to boom under a new regulator. Financial services will benefit immensely. You only have to look at bank stocks after the election to know what the market thinks. Commodity companies will invest more if they don't have to worry about constantly falling afoul of regulators like the EPA. Small business confidence. It's been down in the dumps for a while now, and it's picking up. Consumer expectations of the future are improving rapidly.
All of that is true, and I agree with you. Certain industries will benefit immensely from a new regulatory approach. I just don't think it translates to much faster overall growth. So look, you said small business sentiment has been poor for ages. True. And yet, those same small businesses have kept hiring. We have not had a single month of job losses, even when the Fed hiked to 5.5% to wrestle inflation well below 3%. Small businesses might have said they were depressed, but they did not act that way. Now, as for stocks, right, the S&P 500, it's up 6% since the election. Every week it does make a new high, but it was already up 22% for the year before that, Brad. This is a healthy economy. Animal spirits and a pro-growth deregulatory approach will work, but it's not going to make the economy grow at 4.5 instead of 2.5.
So speaking of strong growth, tax cuts clearly made a difference in the first Trump term. We were just talking about 3% and threes and that beautiful number. So the economy grew over 3% in 2018 despite the U.S.-China trade war. And that was thanks in part to the tax cut package passed in late 2017. Trump's talked of not just extending the tax cuts, but lowering the corporate tax rate even further, reducing the income tax burden through state and local deductions being exempt, etc. This is all pretty positive for growth.
Look, the expiring Trump tax cuts will most likely be extended. I agree on that. But that just makes sure that the status quo persists. I honestly don't see how this administration will push through major new tax cuts. Our fiscal situation is not great. We keep running these multi-trillion-dollar deficits, and extending these expiring cuts itself will add another $5 trillion to that deficit over the next decade.
They're all big. I completely agree with that. But come on, if we're already running $2 trillion deficits, what's another $5 trillion over 10 years? That's nothing. Congress really hasn't seemed worried about fiscal issues at all. You're telling me that suddenly they're going to get religion?
Look, I take what you're saying, and God knows Congress has never proven itself to be fiscally prudent. But keep in mind, this House majority is really, really small. The House ended up at 220, 215. 3 of those House members are now gone. If you open the door to major new tax cuts, I think the bond market is very likely to rebel, and that will be enough to get the House at least to back off new cuts. Remember 2017? The Republicans had a much, much bigger House majority. They ran on ending Obamacare, and they still couldn't get it done. It is very, very hard to get Congress to go all in one direction, even if one party controls everything.
Ajay, you know what else I remember about 2017? After 9 months of trying to repeal Obamacare and failing, the Republicans then got together and they passed tax cuts in a remarkably quick fashion. Let me give you a little analogy here. You might think about it similar to the way you parent, right? So Congress struggles to take things away from the American people. But I also think they find it pretty easy to give away new goodies, such as new tax cuts, instead of just extending the expiring ones. But look, let's turn to the final point on the agenda, tariffs. This is the one we said the whole world is waiting for, the details. You can hardly argue this isn't going to be a big deal in general.
Well, it's a big deal if the Trump campaign rhetoric plays out. And yes, the Trump campaign did promise 10% blanket tariffs and 60% on China. I'm not going to quibble. These are large numbers for sure.
And look, I think it's different from the 2018 China tariffs. Those were massively diluted by import substitution. China started routing goods through Mexico, Bangladesh, Vietnam, etc. U.S. importers looked for alternatives, and the net impact of those tariffs ended up being very small. The average tariff on all U.S. imports right now is just 2%, even though the 2018 China tariffs are still in place.
That is absolutely true. I do think that the 10% blanket, and the word blanket is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, blanket tariffs this time would leave US importers no place to hide, no place to substitute. So yes, at face value, that 10%, 60% plan pushes up average tariffs on US imports from 2% to 17%.
Exactly. That's the number I was looking for. It seems like a pretty big change for the world economy to deal with.
Yeah, except Brad, the one thing we learned from the first Trump term is that you're supposed to take him seriously, but not literally. Inflation was the number one issue for the US electorate this cycle. Number two was either immigration or abortion rights, depending on who you asked. But unfair trade practices, that ranked very far back.
All right, so if I'm reading through the lines here, are you implying that the US won't impose heavy tariffs because it pushes up inflation?
That is exactly what I'm saying. Imported goods are 11% of US GDP. A 10% increase in tariffs, blanket, that pushes up inflation by around 1% before you factor in offsets. I just don't see the president-elect being willing to push an issue that the electorate cares about far less at the expense of inflation, which is an issue voters care about immensely.
Well, just before you said that, you mentioned the word offsets, and there are offsets. So last time, the RMB depreciated 10% against the USD after the China tariffs. This time, too, I imagine currency moves will take away much of the sting of heavy tariffs.
Well, except the Trump campaign also says they want a weaker dollar, Brad, and they are likely to be very, very unhappy with further strength in the greenback. And look, don't forget, other countries will hit back with their own tariffs, politically targeted in key swing constituencies, often hitting jobs in these districts.
I think you're being too sanguine, Ajay. So the Trump team, they actually can't always have their cake and eat it too. It comes back to a little bit of what you were saying about, what they were saying and whether it actually is what will occur. Various Trump advisors, including Robert Lighthizer, have warned that the U.S. might have to take some short-term pain in the tariff war for the longer-term health of U.S. manufacturing. Lighthizer's former chief of staff, Paul Greer, was just named the U.S. trade representative. And the U.S. holds a lot of the cards right now. It's an economy almost twice the size of the euro area. We're an energy superpower. We are arguably the preeminent technology superpower as well. Countries engaging in tit-for-tat tariffs are starting from a weaker hand than the U.S.
I agree with all of that. I just feel that Trump is transactional at heart, and that the bulk of the tariffs, Brad, I think will be negotiated away if countries make concessions. It doesn't all have to be on trade even. Sometimes those concessions can be on immigration, on drug flow, like with Mexico and Canada. Look, remember, that is how it played out last time. Mexico and Canada ended up renegotiating NAFTA, but they also avoided big tariff hits.
And yet, Ajay, 2 weeks ago, Trump threatened 25% tariffs on both Mexico and Canada, even if it meant blowing up the USMCA, the very trade agreement that he himself negotiated in his first term.
Look, I honestly think that is a threat that he's using only to wring concessions, one that he's not going to follow up on. I sound like a bit of a broken record, I get that, but I suspect every aspect of the Trump economic agenda is likely to be far, far more moderate than the rhetoric suggests. There are simply too many checks and balances in the US system of government. There are too many stakeholders pulling in every direction.
I still think you're underweighting that this is a second-term president, and think about this particular president, who knows he has a limited time and power to make a lasting impact, and he's determined to do so, and controls both chambers of Congress, even if only won by a slim majority, as you said. The Trump economic agenda is likely to be anything but incremental in my view, but we'll figure it out because only time will tell. Speaking of time, I think ours is nearly up, and I know there's a number of things we didn't discuss, including the Musk Department of Government Efficiency, how the new administration will approach the Fed, whether a new Plaza Accord is possible, and many more. All fascinating topics, especially for future Flipside. For now, though, clients can read our latest thoughts on the Trump economic agenda in our latest global outlook titled Room for Optimism, available on Barclays Live.
That's all for now from this Barclays podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the flip side. For more insights on this topic, clients can log into Barclays Live or find out more at barclays.com/IB.